Okay.
Okay.
Mike and I are going to reflect on a high-profile exhibition project, Journeys with the Wasteland, developed and presented in 2018 at Turner Contemporary, and then in a different form at the Herbert Coventry and Coventry Cathedral in collaboration with the Mead Gallery, University of Warwick. At the heart of the project was the ambition to reposition the notion of expertise within curatorial research. The project tested the impact of opening up the curatorial process to multiple voices and perspectives, seeing what would happen when different life experiences were brought to bear on exhibition making. Approximately 120 people were involved at various points over 3 years of shared curatorial research and decision making. The core Margate group settled at about 25 people and the Coventry group of 10. Over 40 organisations were involved in each location as partners, and the lead venues received over 160,000 visits. This presentation was prepared in March, so we'll take you through it as we set our thoughts out then. However, given that so much has shifted, we'll add some comments on where we think challenges and opportunities lie now in such a very different context for all aspects of our work. I'm going to start by saying a few things about the development of local ecologies and impact of the methodology on local ecologies and the museum ecosystem. Mike is going to reflect on the impact of the methodology on content and relations to traditional research outputs, so how to translate the outcomes of this project into ecologies of professional validation and authority. Journeys with the Wasteland reconfigured the museum ecosystem in terms of relational processes at work. If we think of a gallery spatially, programmatically, relationally, and temporally, often programmatically, most of the work galleries do and the time taken to do it is invisible to audiences. Then there's a brief moment when research gets presented in gallery exhibition spaces where audiences get to engage with and debate research outcomes. When participatory relationships are foregrounded in the research process, all aspects of research power dynamics are reconfigured. Moreover, the methods that bring this level of engagement to bear on content are themselves examples of research, both traditional and practice-led. I'm going to mention 4 examples of how ecology shifted during Journeys with the Wasteland. Firstly, in terms of terms and timing, conversations around content and interpretation were happening much earlier. We were working to a timescale of years with audiences rather than hours, days, or weeks. Audience members were involved throughout the entire research process rather than through highly constructed moments. In terms of impact, this influenced decision-making and ownership by having to make everything visible. For example, explaining loan processes and naming things normally assumed and thereby hidden, so recognizing each community's language. Secondly, in terms of roles and structures, we couldn't just assimilate a group into the institution's pre-existing parameters. People's interests don't intersect tidily with museum departmental boundaries, and people took on multiple and intersecting roles. Subgroups sprung up to research everything from design to music to retail, stretching a long way beyond the traditional parameters of the curator. Working with individuals with different hats and different amounts of time to give meant identities and allegiances were always shifting, and this led to a complex ecology in developing the exhibition, which Turner Contemporary had to respond to. This also led to administrative challenges around how to hold and share information. Relationally, the project grew through a network of individuals, which does beg the question of who wasn't involved, a particular pertinent question to reflect on in relation to Black Lives Matter. Ownership and individual responsibility meant strong relationships formed and were maintained. People took on different roles at different points in the project. For example, Turner Contemporary's head of development worked on funding aspects of the project, but also assumed a very different role and sense of agency in relation to the group when volunteering out of hours in their own time. Thirdly, processes. Methodologically, we weren't following a preordained brief. There were certain key milestones, such as deadlines for loan requests or commissioning design and print, but methods were co-constructed with the group and involved testing different techniques. Finding ways to experimentally and experientially workshop ideas as opposed to just having meetings was key, with all group members pitching in on possible strategies. This led to a process characterized by everything from briefings to sharings to one-to-one exchanges, such as speed dating, to forms of group philosophical inquiry in terms of presenting research and learning from each other. Fourthly, spaces. working with a group of local co-researchers, took the work of the gallery off-site into different spaces. Throughout the process, different modes of interaction happened in different spaces to facilitate different forms of engagement. And then in the public programme, which was crucially important to the group, who wanted the boundary between town and gallery to be distinctly porous. 2 years on from the Margate and Coventry exhibitions, I'm now going to offer some brief reflections on the impact of having worked in this way. Personally, I've been invited to speak about the project at research seminars to support other galleries build participatory models and on student curating courses. I've also developed and facilitated scaled down versions of the model, ranging from an 8-week project with the Cursor Trust working with probation service users, right down to a 1-day selection process for school children at Turner Contemporary. In terms of the impact on research group members themselves, there are many examples to draw on. For example, an occupational therapist who at the time of the project had been working within mental health services within the NHS is now running arts and wellbeing programming at a museum in Canterbury. Organisationally, Turner Contemporary continued to develop the notion of an audience-led approach. Margate Now 2019, happening alongside the Turner Prize, was born from the Journeys with the Wasteland off-site programme. New shows under development pick up on the question of who didn't Journeys with the Wasteland involve. In terms of legacy, methodologically, the Margate Reading Group still meet and are working on their second Eliot-themed show. The Coventry group began and stayed a smaller, less diverse group than Margate and still see themselves as a group. For example, go on visits together, and some members continue to work with Mike at other venues. Warwick is now considering a different participative approach to a Coventry 2021 project. In thinking about how this project might impact research practice more generally, I want to close with a couple of methodological questions. Firstly, who owns a methodology? Is it the participants, facilitating curators, institutions, or all of the above? Interestingly, we surveyed former research group members in preparing for this presentation, and all still felt a strong sense of ownership and pride over the project and its narrative, despite now having differing relationships to the host institutions and each other. Secondly, to what extent is learning embodied, particularly when it comes to trialling and tailoring different tools and techniques in relation to individual circumstances? When specialist staff and volunteers move on, how does this affect institutional memory and a continuation of practice? Thirdly, how does methodology interact with appropriate form and content? Journeys with the Wasteland worked methodologically because it mirrored the form of Eliot's poem, which itself is a cacophony of multiple voices. The method was tied closely to the content of the show. It wasn't about opening anything up in any way. So arguably there needs to be a rationale for working in a participative way that makes sense to the content.
So in developing the points that Trish has made, in March, I had drafted 3 themes, and I'd like to describe something of how I feel about them now. In March, I wish to share with the British Art Network members something about exhibition ecologies and academic and professional validation. The primary outcome for our collective work were the exhibitions and their programmes. These are intangible and not summarised in a hard publication. The evaluative website is, one might say, highly accessible, being digital, but still seems fugitive and remains dense as an online read. Despite the reassurances of the academic peer assessment processes, in finalising my REF submission, I find that the vehicles for sharing and for validation within the academic and professional fields continue to feel dependent on a printed, text-based output that corroborates the exhibition and event. Whether this will shift in the new culture of digital sharing is something that I know will follow. Secondly, in March, I wanted to point out that the Journeys with the Wasteland groups, individually and collective, one might say an ecology of its own, has been slow, perhaps even nervous, to share the research we generated. And by research, I don't mean around the methodologies, as we are discussing today, but around Eliot, the poem, and the visual arts. Indeed, as Trish has said, the methodology was adopted precisely because of the fit to the subject of the poem and its relationships to the visual arts. But we have found the nature and form of our outcomes not difficult, but perhaps uncomfortable to put before the audience primarily interested in 20th century art and modernism. Thirdly, in March, we plan to say how we can underestimate quite how embedded traditional research and curating methods are in their own established and internalized ecologies. We were both feeling that people resile to traditional models of research and curating, models that may not reflect the learning from participatory research, especially when looking to guarantee reputation and measures like visitor numbers. Ironic when you consider how popular Journeys with the Wasteland became. In contrast, we often found that we have become called on as guest researchers and facilitators to advise or help plan at the early stages of a project, when in fact our experience as researchers would make us wish to propose a way that our roles evolved into continuity over the long term. In this way, we would help nurture the idea of curator as caretaker, a facilitator of the insights and ideas of groups of people, rather than the purveyor of information. In March, we concluded by asking, does this matter? Looking back on the answers we drafted at that time is intriguing. We said, we may be amused or irritated by the appropriation of the term curated by everything from restaurant menus to algorithmic playlists. We should remind ourselves that these depend on an image of the curator as the privileged gatekeeper of knowledge, and of the curatorial as a process to narrow the management of choice. In March, we also wish to say that in contrast, helping people feel inside social processes and networks, enabling them to influence their surroundings, is widely recognized as a step to well-being and cohesion. So how will these persist in an historical moment dominated by digital access and the concomitant questions of inequalities, whether the digital or the impact of Black Lives Matter? The question of who lies at the heart of the curatorial ecology, who are its audiences, must now take centre stage. In March, we'd planned to say that we have to revisit the idea of the local ecology and the idea of the globalized curatorial community anyway, as we address climate crisis. The model of shipping objects in air crates at the behest of experts whose careers straddle different continents surely has to be revised. The roles of locally expert researchers bringing fresh insights into locally relevant themes and histories, cognizant of wide subjects and issues, is one vital way of addressing this. Today, we have an utterly different sense of social engagement, of the further enhancement of the power that inheres in the control of the digital and its apparent offer of curatorial access, and the contingencies of ideas like travel and sharing. We may diverge between each other and between groups as to how the needs of meeting in person and the impacts on well-being of doing so or not will play out. However, museums are now forced to review the model of the blockbuster exhibition, the museum shop as a fulcrum of activity, and we will also have to revisit the show and tell curatorial model. We're not merely resisting perceptions of irrelevance, of the outcomes themselves, such as exhibitions, learning programs, and indeed galleries and museums themselves, but also the academic and management structures that generate them, the universities, the collections, the infrastructure. The show and tell model, as is frequently noted, is in effect a power relationship. In our view, where to begin in defending our values and our potential as a curatorial community is not by juxtaposing distinct practices such as traditional expertise and participation as either or, but by recognizing that they can work together as part of a shared, mutually dependent ecology of practices. Thank you very much.